Hi, I'm Bren. I'm a grad student in English. Today I want to talk about N.K. Jemisin's 2010 novel, The 100,000 Kingdoms, and in particular, I want to discuss the character of Nahadoth. Although I do not intend to discuss the plot of the novel directly, Nahadoth is a central character and I will be discussing the events of the novel surrounding Nahadoth throughout, so expect massive spoilers if that's something you're concerned about. There's your spoiler warning. I want to explore how Nahadoth, despite being the oldest being in existence, a god for lack of a better term, has come to be imprisoned by humanity, their own creation. To help me with this, I will be drawing on the works of Judith Butler and Jacques Derrida to examine how Nahadoth is acted upon by social forces that produce gender, and that this gender is performative as the effect of expectations, particularly the expectations of the humans that enslave them, and the repetition of these expected behaviors and appearances that shape Nahadoth over centuries and millennia. Additionally, I want to draw from Derrida's Monolingualism of the Other to explore how the imposition of a dominant language on both the gods and the humans of sky serves to constrain them through a linguistic hegemony that subjugates the gods' language to that of their human captors. Since Nahadoth is shaped by the expectations of humans that are constrained by the limitations of their own language, so too is Nahadoth constrained by the limits of human understanding. In discussing the hopeful ending of the story, I want to then draw on Indigenous theory and explore the connections between Indigenous pantheistic beliefs and languages, and the language and philosophy of the gods in the novel to imagine a different way of human-god relating that might arise after the events of the novel. But let's start with performativity. Actually, let's start with what performativity isn't. Quote, "The misapprehension about gender performativity is this, that gender is a choice, or that gender is a role, or that gender is a construction that one puts on as one puts on clothes in the morning, that there is a one who is prior to this gender." End quote. Butler is saying that gender is not a performance, it isn't a role that one takes on. Rather, the gendered self is constituted through an ongoing process of the, quote, reiteration of a norm or set of norms, end quote. Nahadoth is the god of chaos. Although Nahadoth is depicted for the majority of the novel as a sexy pale man with long dark hair, the truth is that Nahadoth's true form is more complex. At one point, Yene tells us that Nahadoth must change because he is change. Further, Yene is told that Nahadoth is shaped by the expectations of humans. Qwo-Li says, quote, "It is the expectations, fears, and desires that shape him into a monster," end quote. Nahadoth clarifies further when he says to Yene, quote, "Your thoughts have always harmed me. All your terrors, all your needs, they push and pull at me. Silent commands," end quote. When Yene and Nahadoth do finally hook up, Yene seems to at first acknowledge the constraints she places on them when she says, quote, "I do not say his hands because there were too many of them," end quote, seemingly aware of the gendered pronouns and their inability to describe a being such as Nahadoth, only to resort to binarisms moments later when her human urges take over once again. This she seems to acknowledge too when she states that no mortal girl could satisfy the longing inside Nahadoth, stating that despite this, quote, "For that moment I yearned to be more, give more, because I loved him," end quote. In the end, Yene's ideas of Nahadoth continue to shape them into something constrained to human understanding. She continues to contribute to the prison of gender that they are trapped inside, which is why Nahadoth does not carry her into the maelstrom as every lover before her. Her human mind could not comprehend their true nature, and because Nahadoth truly cares for her, she is spared this fate. But it isn't just Yene's language that contributes to this gendering of Nahadoth, but also how she sees Nahadoth, how she interprets the way Nahadoth moves and acts, and how she desires Nahadoth. At one point, Nahadoth tells Yene that, quote, "At the dawn of reality, I was myself. There was nothing and no one else to influence me, only the maelstrom that had given birth to me, and it did not care," end quote. As Butler states in Gender Trouble, quote, Because there is neither an essence that gender expresses or externalizes, nor an objective ideal to which gender aspires, and because gender is not a fact, the various acts of gender create the idea of gender, and without those acts there would be no gender at all." End quote. The maelstrom does not care. As much as Nahadoth is constrained by gender through social norms and expectations over time, there is another aspect to the enslavement of these gods: language itself. We are told multiple times that the gods have their own language that humans cannot comprehend, but it is the language of the humans of sky that acts upon them. Even those that learn the gods' language are only able to learn its written component, and despite their training in languages to become acquainted with the flexibility of language and the mind itself, they are acted upon by the dominant language of sky, just as the gods are, and thus their understanding of the gods' language is also mediated through the dominant language. In Monolingualism and the Other, Derrida opens by writing, quote, "I only have one language. It is not mine." While Derrida does speak specifically about French and its imposition on him as a mother tongue, he is also speaking to language's role in identity formation, the alienation that one feels from never truly feeling at home in a language, the potential for the hierarchizing of culture and language by the dominant culture, and the instability of language in general. Quote, "Every culture institutes itself through the unilateral imposition of some politics of language. Mastery begins, as we know, through the power of naming, of imposing, and legitimating appellations. The monolingualism imposed by the other operates by relying upon that foundation, here through a sovereignty whose essence is always colonial, which tends repressively and irrepressibly to reduce language to the one, that is, to the hegemony of the homogeneous." End quote. In a flashback to the beginning, we are introduced to the three gods as siblings that have sex, but of course we are told that, quote, "This is an approximation. You realize this is what your mortal mind can comprehend," end quote. We are told that sibling, family, love, and sex are placeholders for a kinship beyond our understanding. Language is insufficient, and this passage pushes against the walls of this prison of language to later tell us that this love was more than love, that mortals have no words for the feelings of gods, because not even gods have words for such things. Notably, the passage genders both Etempus and Enepha, but refuses to refer to Nahadoth by a gendered pronoun. Quote, "The walls of his prison were blood and bone, the barred windows were eyes. The punishments included sleep and pain and hunger and all the other incessant demands of mortal flesh." End quote. Nahadoth is constrained not only by gendered expectations of the other, but also by language itself, just as all of sky is. "You at once appreciate the source of my sufferings, the place of my passions, my desires, my prayers, the vocation of my hopes, since this language runs right across them all. But I am wrong to speak of a crossing and a place, for it is on the shores of language, uniquely, and neither inside nor outside it, on the unplaceable line of its coast that since forever and lastingly, I wonder if one can love, enjoy oneself, pray, die from pain, or just die, plain and simple, in another language without telling anyone about it, without even speaking at all." Similarly to Derrida, Gerald Visner describes the English language as a language of paradoxes. At once the language of, quote, "colonial discoveries, racial cruelties, invented names, the simulations of tribal cultures, manifest manners, and the unheard literature of dominance in tribal communities," end quote. While at the same time it has functioned as, quote, "language of imagination and liberation for many tribal people in the post-Indian world," end quote. Visner here alludes to an epistemic violence and the role language, specifically the language of the oppressor, plays in perpetuating this violence, but he also points to the liberating potential that language has for oppressed people. Yene tells us of the inability to translate certain concepts between languages,
We are told that the God language, quote, allows the conceptualization of the impossible, end quote. Sia speaks the God language in front of Yene, and she understands the power in its orality and its opposition to fixity, both in time and space, and she understands the futility in the human scrivener's attempts at mastery. I am reminded of the Anishinaabe word for the creator or God, and how this is often presented as Qwo-Li, but this is an approximation into a language that is tied to beliefs that are shaped by that language. A closer approximation for this divine energy is the Great Mystery. Basil Johnston in The Manitous describes Qwo-Li as, quote, beyond human grasp, beyond words, neither male nor female, not of the flesh. Qwo-Li cannot be known or described in human corporeal terms. Qwo-Li is known through the universe, the cosmos, and the world, end quote.
In Where's God's Wife, or Is He Gay? Tomson highways forward to Two-Spirit Act's queer Indigenous performances. He speaks about the arrival of monotheistic religion and the heterosexual God in the Americas and the much older tradition of pantheism that it encountered upon arrival. Highway states that to truly understand pantheism, he's speaking specifically of the various indigenous spiritual belief systems of the Americas and how old it is, you, quote, have to speak at least one native language with complete fluency, for that's where such secrets lie, within the warp and weave of linguistic structure, end quote. Iwe states that these beliefs were from before the anthropomorphic ideas of divinity, before humans shaped gods into our own image. In these spiritualities, divinity has no human form. It is energy. I'm reminded of Nahadoth at the beginning of time and reality, pure chaos, pure energy. Qwo-Li, this great mystery, this divine energy, pulses through everything. As Howe puts it, quote, animating everyone in all that it touches and or passes through, which is one reason why pantheistic languages don't even have a he or a she, end quote. Howe describes how these languages dispense with ideas of gender and divide the world only into animate and inanimate. Unlike the hierarchical straight line of monotheism, pantheistic belief systems are circular, with every living thing represented on the circle with equal status. I am again reminded of Nahadoth and the embossed artwork of them that Yene encounters hidden in the Library of Sky. She describes reaching up to touch Nahadoth's portrait, confused by what could have been a, quote, swirl of cloth or a rounded breast, end quote. She is then told that Nahadoth was forced into a single shape. When he was free, he was all things beautiful and terrible, end quote. We are told early in the novel that once there were three gods: order, chaos, and balance. Not a straight line, but a circle, with all things equal and balanced.
Even after apotheosis, Yene's ascension to godhood, she continues to refer to Nahadoth in binary terms. She acknowledges their shifting nature when she claims that in her newly ascended form, she sees and accepts the true beauty in Nahadoth that mortals would not see as beauty, quote, since some of his faces were not human, end quote. Nahadoth is compassionate, and in the end is very much aware of the damage that has been wrought on Yene by a life lived trapped inside a human body, inside a human world, and inside human ideological apparatuses. But she has also lived with the soul of Enifa inside her, and they tell her that she has become accustomed to living with two souls. Like Nahadoth, she had lived with these two spirits, and she even muses that maybe it is Nahadoth that allowed them to see the possibility of living with two spirits. She says, quote, two souls, or at least two selves in a single body. Perhaps that is where the Enifada had gotten the idea, end quote. Yene points out at the end that she is giddy like a human girl, adding the human modifier and leaving the gender modifier, and Nahadoth tells Yene that, quote, you have much to learn. I have many wonders to show you, end quote, implying the beginning of a development beyond the constraints of binaries, language, and gender.